Okay, BookTube, as you can see, I'm in my usual studio with all the ring lights and the fake books behind me, and I'm here to do the most epic book haul I have done up to date on this channel, which will be completely out of date once I do the next book haul on this channel. And so I have a lot of books to go through, and I want to get through them pretty quickly, so I'm not just dwelling on them for 40 minutes each, and then I have to do 4 parts at an hour per video. So we're gonna jump right in. And if you know my book haul videos already, you know there's going to be lots of history on them, and this one is no different. There's lots of history here, lots of general history, but there's also lots of medieval history. So, do I want to start with general history or medieval history? Let's go with medieval history, because that's what you're all here and excited to see. We're going to start off with a famous book, a medieval history book. This one was a bestseller in the day. This is Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror. This is my first copy of this book. I really like the modern Penguin paperback that they come out with now, but I wasn't willing to spend the $20 or $30 that they charge for that book. So finding this for, how much was it? $1 for this. Perfectly good condition, other than a little bit bent over here. But other than that, it's clean, it's perfectly used, perfectly good in used condition. Then I'll take it. And this book is about the 14th century. The calamitous 14th century. And I heard that she's a very good writer, and I'm looking forward to getting to her histories. A minute and 45 seconds in, and I'm only talking about one book. Well, we gotta go faster. The next book is Medieval Europe by Martin Scott. This is a nice squat hardcover, and they had a number of these there at this book sale that I went to. It was a big charity book sale. I should describe what this book sale was. It was a big charity book sale inside a mall, and they just have lines of books everywhere in every section of the mall, and it's for the children's hospital in my city here. So you can help out by donating to them, and you get a whole bunch of books in return, and the books are all so very reasonably priced that I got a ton of books. And I guess if I had the editing skills, I would insert that clip from, I don't know if you've heard of Kenneth Copeland, the pastor, the crazy, almost looks kind of demonic in the way he looks. And there's a video of a journalist asking him why he bought a private jet from someone that he knew, and he just looks at the camera and he says, "But he made it so cheap that I couldn't help but buy it." And that's my response to buying all these books. All these books are so cheap, I just couldn't help but buy it. So I went crazy with all the books I bought, and I bought a ton of medieval stuff, including this one. So there was a number of these there. This one was. They're all about the same condition, and it's a very good condition. And this is just a general history of medieval Europe from the mid-60s. So I'll put it on my pile of medieval books. Next is actually a find that I had on my wish list that I never went out and bought, but I'm glad that I found because I was looking for it used. It's the Portable Medieval Reader, and it's an anthology of topics from the medieval era, which is pretty vast when you think about it. It's one of the only periods of history where people like to bunch like 1,000 years of history into, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 pages, as if it's nothing. Yet you get books on World War One that are like that thick, which we'll be getting to in this book haul. But anyways, medieval reader. This is an anthology of just medieval topics that were important back then. I can go through some of the headings. You got the social body, you got the nobility, the peasants, conflict and protest, the Christian Commonwealth, spiritual and temporal authorities, the House of Fame, the world picture, politics, nobility, and builders and painters and musicians, and the mirror of nature. I'll find out what all those mean as I go through that anthology. I have the Renaissance anthology like that too, so it's good to have those two that go together. And then I have the History of Europe, Early Medieval Europe 300 to 1000. As you see what I mean now? That's 700 years of history bound up in this small volume. In about 350 pages. But then again, our sources for this period are rather scant, which is usually why it's called the Dark Ages. Wait, did I say the author for that one? It's by Roger Collins. So it's another medieval European history. I actually quite like the cover on that one too. And then I have Morris Bishop's The Middle Ages, another short history on the medieval period. And I just pick these up. I'm not very picky with my medieval history because I just want to eat it all up. And I'll grab almost anything. And then we get into some of the more specialty medieval histories. Those are the general ones. This one is A History of Private Life, Revelations of the Medieval World. And it's a big fat thing because it's illustrated very liberally. And it's oversized too, as you see with the margins. Yeah, medieval. And I've never heard of this series before, but it's published by Harvard University Press. And this was published in 5 volumes in French. And this and only one volume is dedicated to the medieval period because it goes from antiquity to modern, which is the modern when these were published, modern period. And volume 2 is medieval history, and it's the only one that they had there because if they had the whole set, I certainly would have bought the whole thing. And so it's lucky that the one volume that they did have is the medieval one. And it's translated, the whole series is translated by Arthur Goldhammer, which, if you are familiar with, is basically a superstar in the scholarly translation world. When people want to do translations into English, they go after the popular and the bestsellers and whatnot. The ones like literature, novels, that kind of thing. This guy, Arthur Goldhammer, has resigned himself to publishing scholarly works like this. Like, this is certainly not a bestseller, and yet there he is, our hero, translating scholarly works that 10 people will read. And I thank him for it because it's a thankless job. The next book is a very apt one. It's the Oxford Illustrated History of Medieval Europe, which is, I say it's apt because I have the exact same volume of this for the History of Philosophy, which I actually read last year. And it's exactly what it says it is. It's a history, but it's also got a whole bunch of illustrations. And the thing about these volumes is that they're done in essay format. So it's not a work of one person writing the whole thing. They chop the subject into chunks. In this one here, we got 6 different chapters, and they got 6 different scholars to do each a little section of the medieval period of Europe, or medieval history. And again, I quite like that cover. Nice illustration on the back there. We're almost done the medieval period, and then we'll get into some of the other history books that I got. Now we have some of the more interesting ones. We got Romance and Legend of Chivalry by A.R. Hope Moncrief. And the accompanying volume is The Middle Ages by, who is this by? H.A. Gruber. And these volumes are in a series by Bracken Books called Myths and Legends. And if you can see, they list all the myths and legends that they publish in this series. So like North American Indians, as they call them. We call them differently now. We got the Norsemen, we got India, we got British, Germany, Greece and Rome, Egypt, Celtics, China and Japan, Spain, and Buddhists, and we got a little bit more. But they publish a volume just collecting their myths, or one scholar who retells the myths as like a one-stop volume to go to get the most popular version of that myth that most people know as a reference. And they do 2 on the Middle Ages. We got the Romance Romance and Legend of Chivalry, which is like chivalric romance, courtly love, that kind of thing. And then we've got Middle Ages, which deals more with medieval legends and myths that don't fit that mold of chivalry and knights in shining armor. Though, I believe it's this version that actually deals with King Arthur and the Holy Grail. Well, this one dedicates itself more to, I've looked at this before. Yeah, it deals more with, Roland, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and those kinds of myths. So for some reason, King Arthur doesn't make it into this volume, except through Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and then this one deals with that one instead. I'm not entirely sure. I'll see how they differ and how they're the same. And then we got one more book on the medieval period, and we're 11 minutes in. We've got Inventing the Middle Ages by Norman Cantor. And Norman Cantor has published some books on the Middle Ages before. I have his, Civilization of the Middle Ages on my shelf. This is his study of how the medieval period was changed and shifted in the 20th century. Like the subtitle is The Lives, Works, and Ideas of Great Medievalists in the 20th Century. And it's basically him studying like how the imagery that we associate with the Middle Ages was born out of these scholars. Basically, these scholars glorifying the Middle Ages into something that it doesn't really fit the historical record, or at least is largely exaggerated by these people. And I find that concept very interesting. I don't recognize a whole lot of the names in here, except for a few. Like he has C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And then he also has Johann Huizinga, who wrote The Waning of the Middle Ages, which is a book that I have on my shelf, but I have not read. So those are the only scholars I know. I think he does 20 studies of those little portraits of these scholars, and then just how they shaped our thinking of the Middle Ages in the 20th century. And then that's it for medieval history. Now we can move on to general history, or general subjective history. First one up is A History of the Later Roman Empire, 284 AD to 641. And this is a beautiful Blackwell Publishing volume. And actually, in my history class, I took a Greek history class in university for the classical Greek period, and the volume in this series with like the same design, the same red banner, and then like an old image on there. We had to read the classical Greek volume as our course textbook, and it was by, was it Rhodes? Peter Rhodes, I think is the scholar's name, and it was very good. And so I've been wanting to get more in that series, but if you buy it brand new, you have to pay textbook price. But when you find it used, you have to pay $4. Though, you do get that. All the highlighting. That isn't in here a whole lot, though, I don't think. Yeah, you can tell that this person only read about 100 pages in, and then they quit highlighting. Though highlighting doesn't bother me too much, as long as it's done with a method, instead of just highlighting everything blindly. So history, I didn't even say who the author was. It's Stephen Mitchell, which actually sounds familiar. I think I might know who that is. At least, I'm familiar with the name. So maybe I've seen some of their books before, or I've added some of their books to my wish list. The next book is A Thin Little Thing. It's also a little bit of a theme with my mail haul, or my book hauls, where I always find a thin little thing on the history of philosophy. And that's what this is, A History of Philosophy. So this is by William Dray. And I have 3 volumes like this already. They're just these slim little things of a scholar just contemplating on what the philosophy of history is. Like, how does history work, and how do we do history? And, if I found this, it just seemed like the gods were calling out to me. So I picked it up. because like I said, it's a tiny little thing, and it goes with some of the books that I've been buying before, so might as well take that one. Here's another slim little volume of history, but it's of a very different kind. It's The Rise of Big Business. 1860 to 1910. A very stark cover there, as you see pollution. And this book wasn't even... When was this book published? 1973. And it's a tiny little book that doesn't even have pages in it. Wow, I've never seen that before. Doesn't even have... Oh, it does. They just hide it. So it's about 100 pages of a study of big business. And honestly, I could read a book 10 times the size on this subject, because that is an interest. That is of great interest to me. Usually people would couch it as like the Industrial Revolution and the rise of industrial business, but this is just a history of big business. So we'll see how interesting that book is. And then we move on to some more Greek. We've got Robin Lane Fox. He writes The Traveling Heroes, Greek myths and their Greeks and their myths in the epic age of Homer. I was aware of this book when I was reading Homer. I was really hoping I could read this when I was reading Homer, but I didn't have a copy of this, and I wasn't going to buy it brand new, so getting it used is perfect. It's Robin Lane Fox. He's a popular historian, but he also does scholarly work too, and he does a lot of writing on Homer and a lot of Greek subjects. I think Homer, though, is one of his main topics, but Robin Lane Fox. Let's see here. Next, we got Lancaster of York, The Wars of the Roses, by Alison Weir. And the Wars of the Roses, or the War of the Roses, or Wars of the Roses, does interest me quite a bit, because it's a very interesting period of English history where you move on from the old bloodline of England to the Tudor line, and then you also got the interesting history of Richard III and in there as well. And that little period of time also was when you got some very interesting details of publishing in England, and including, was it Thomas Mallory's book on Arthur, the Le Marche de Tours? I never know if I'm saying that correctly, but Le Marche de Tours, I'm just going to say it like that. And so just having that war between the houses of Lancaster and the houses of York, it's something that quite interests me, so that's why I picked that one up. I believe I have an ebook of a book on the same subject too, but have not got to it. Next we have as another common theme, if you watched my last book haul, I have another book by C.B. Macpherson. This is his book on Burke. It's a series of past masters, and it's tiny. It's not even 100 pages. It's, 70 pages. I don't know why this scholar, of all people, likes to write tiny little books, but here's his book on Burke. Edmund Burke, Edmund Burke, like the author of The Revolutions in France, or Reflections on the Revolutions of France, which I actually hauled on my last book haul as well. And now we move on to some Renaissance history. We've got The Penguin Book of the Renaissance by J.H. Plum. Though that's actually misleading, because I looked at this book before, and it looks like J.H. Plum doesn't even write half the book. Yeah, it looks like he writes every other chapter, and then we got different scholars, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different scholars contributing a chapter of their own in here. So, mostly on people. He writes the general history, while we got dedicated chapters on Pope Pius II, or Machiavelli, or Michelangelo, and then a different scholar writes that chapter. I don't know why they don't get any credit, or why there's not any kind of editor, but that's what this book is all about. the Renaissance. Next we got C.V. Wedgwood, The 30 Years' War. And it's a very ugly cover, in my opinion. It's sort of like a yellow-pink target. And this is a book on the 30 Years' War, which is from the 17th century. I don't know a whole lot about that war other than it is a largely influential war in religious and cultural thought, and also on national identity, especially Germany, where they look back to the implications of the 30 Years' War and how that reflected on themselves as a nation. And I've heard a lot of good things by this author, C.V. Wedgwood, and so I'm curious to read some of her work. Though there was other books by this author as well at the book sale, but I wasn't quite sure about them. I've never actually read this author and never looked into what she was all into writing about. But it was only after I picked this up that I found out she's a British historian. And at the back says that she's a well-known history of the 17th century. So that's probably what those books were about, but I didn't pick them up. I just picked up this one on the 30 Years' War. Next, speaking of Tolkien, I've mentioned Tolkien before in the context of the Middle Ages. Now I have a book on Tolkien. It's Tolkien's World by Randall Helms. And it's the cover is just a black and white picture of a tree. And if I didn't know better, I would say this book was self-published, because there's no publisher anywhere mentioned on this thing. And this was by far the most expensive book, because it seems like at that book sale, it seemed like the more popular the book, the more expensive it was. So you got Tolkien. Tolkien's name just immediately makes this more expensive. Well, because in the center of that mall, they have all the contemporary fiction and mystery and romance books all into one, and that's where most people focus on, and then it's all stuffed and packed with people. And those books can go for quite a lot, or at least they're more expensive. They're at times double the amount that I pay for a work of history, for example. But anyways, I've looked for a publisher for this book. Oh, it's on the front page, right there. But they don't mention the publisher at all on the outside of the book. Anyway, this is just a study of Tolkien. What interests me most about this book is that this was published shortly after Tolkien died, because I believe he died in 72 or 73, and this book was published in 1974. So, and one of the things that really sold me on this was chapter 4, which is called Frodo Anti-Faust, The Lord of the Rings as Contemporary Mythology. So, I'm very interested in a study of Tolkien's work, especially one that appeared shortly after he died. And then we got a book called Who's Who in the Ancient World. The subtitle is A Handbook to the Survivors of the Greek and Roman Classics, which is a very apt title if you know the rates of survival of ancient classics. And the author, who's very curiously not mentioned on the title at all, is Betty Radis. And the main reason I picked this up is because of that author. Because if you know your Penguin Classics, which I'll be going through quite a lot here very soon, Betty Radis was the longtime editor of Penguin Classics. And so she's quite the accomplished scholar herself. And if you've read or you own the copy of the Erasmus Praise of Folly in the Penguin Classic line, she translates that volume. So I'm not even entirely sure what this book is all about. I have not looked into it a whole lot, other than that this is her book on the ancient world, which is right in her line of expertise. So I'm sure she'll be interesting on that subject. Next is another nerdy book that I have, that fits another tradition of the books that I really like, or books that I'm looking for, and this is The Western Intellectual Tradition by Jay Bronowski and Bruce Maslish. And what you cannot see is that this book is textured as like a matte paper finish. So the cover is not sort of plasticky that or glossy that books usually come in. This is like a paper feel to it. And the subtitle is From Leonardo to Hegel. And then it's got a whole link of chains. I don't know a whole bunch about this book too, other than it is what it says it is, an intellectual history. Yeah, and it goes from 1500 to 1830. And it was published in 1960. So there's that one. Sorry if I'm not explaining a whole bunch of these books very well, because I haven't had the time to look at them all yet. And I'm just going off of my thoughts and reasons for picking them up. This next book is a book by an author I have not read yet, but I really need to. This is Margaret Macmillan. This is her short book on the uses and abuses of history. So you could almost consider this another philosophy of history book. And I quite like that cover. It's very distinct, where you got some lines are blacked out and then others are highlighted, and then the author's name and highlight, and that sort of copies or wraps around too. And I don't even know when this book was published, but 2008. But what's remarkable about this book is, one, it had a very enthusiastic annotator. The previous person didn't annotate the book; they just wrote all their notes on the front page here. And number two, that apparently this book was signed by the author. I'm not even entirely. It says Margaret. I think so. Or at least that's what the people at the sale says. It's signed by the author. But I'm kind of skeptical because that doesn't look like a signature, nor does it actually say Margaret. So I'm thinking this wasn't actually signed by the author. But I don't really care. I would read it and treat it like any other book anyways. And now we move on to not quite so history books. Oh, should I get to this book? I think I will. I'm going to go through one of the biggest finds of this haul. And it's one of my favorites that I picked up. I've never even heard of it up to this point, or at least this edition of the book. But it is quite a lavish find. It's Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species, which I've heard about, and I own a little short mass market of on my shelves back here. But this is an illustrated edition, big and fat, and the illustrator is, or the general editor is David Quammen. And it's got French flaps with images all throughout. It's lavishly illustrated. Let's see. Yeah, manuscript works, writings of his own, like Z letters, and see if I can find a full page. There we go, full page. And it's all throughout. It's all. Oh, look at this! Wow, this was a huge find because, guess how much this was? It was $3. $3 for this thing, which normally I wouldn't have picked up something like this because they're so big and so ungainly, and blasphemy as it is to say, I'm not super into books that are illustrated because I kind of ignore the illustrations, to be honest. But for something like this, I can totally see how illustrations would complement the text. And so this is a perfect volume to have of The Origin of Species. And what a remarkable find that was. And I'm going to do the last of my history books, and then we move on to some more classic books, or novels and fiction and that kind of thing. And these next few books, other than this first one, I'm going to go through this one first, and then I'll explain what I'm going to say. This is A Cultural History of the French Revolution by Emmett Kennedy. And I like that cover there. I've been collecting books on the French Revolution because I find it a fascinating subject, and especially the subtitle or the title here, A Cultural History. A Cultural History. Cultural histories as I've said before, are quite interesting to me. So, having a cultural history of the French Revolution is totally within my interest, and this is published by Yale University Press. And I like how that cover sort of continues on the back there. And this one is also illustrated throughout, though not in color. So you got images like that. And this book feels like it's never been used or never been read before, because the spine isn't even cracked. Or at least it doesn't fold out open. Another illustration there. But there's my one book on the French Revolution. And now the last 3 volumes of history books that I'm going to share, or depending on how you count, are all within a certain theme, not via their topic, but based off of the person who's recommended them before. So I'm a avid viewer of Steve Donohue's channel, and if you've watched him for a while, you will recognize these next few books as massive Steve recommendations when it comes to the subject of history. So the first book is Adam Tooze, The Great War, America and the Remaking of the Global Order, 1916 to 1931. And I remember, when I saw this book, I distinctly remember this cover, because I believe Steve has hauled it before, from the Brattle maybe, and he talked about how great of a history this is, but I don't remember his comments. So I searched his name up with this book, and I found that in 2014, when this was published, he did a whole separate year-end list on World War I books, because 1914 fits with the 100-year anniversary of World War I, and this matched up with that. And this was number 1 on his list for World War I books. And as you see, it's not just on World War I, it goes beyond World War I, which is what I'm totally interested in. As I've mentioned before, I'm not interested in so much as military history, so like a 1-volume work on, or not even 1-volume work, but a work on a specific aspect or war or battle in World War I or the Second World War. Those don't interest me as much. But books on what happened leading up to the war and the aftermath of the war, those are far more interesting to me. And this book looks like it explores that. And it has lavish praise, too. Because his previous book, The Wages of Destruction, I guess went over quite well. And I don't know this author at all, but this book looks quite interesting. And it's a Steve recommend. And this next book is also a Steve recommend. And it's Dreadnought by Robert Massey. A big fat history. How fat is it? Almost 1,000 pages. And the subtitle is Britain, Germany, and the Coming of the Great War. So it also fits in with World War I. And this book, I've seen Steve haul this as well, but I also looked it up online, and it turns out this was his number 1 for nonfiction in, 1991 or something? When he retroactively ranked these books. Yeah, 1991. When he retroactively did his year-end's best books of fiction and nonfiction. This was number 1. Big fat history book. And you'll never guess, this book was $2. So, like I'm saying, I just can't help myself. You know, me and Kenneth Copeland have something in common. When we see something cheap that we really like, we just can't help ourselves. So there's that, and then the next history book recommended by Steve, or next history books recommended by Steve, is got to be the find of the day. The absolute find of the day. And it's James Morris Pax Britannica series in a box set from the Folio Society. So you got Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3 from the Folio Society. And I've never owned a book by the Folio Society before because they're so eye-wateringly expensive. Brand new, this thing certainly would be over $200. And it's in perfect condition. And it's a panoramic history, from my understanding, of the British Empire. So the volume 1 begins with the early British Empire. Then we got the middle volume on like the heights of the British Empire, and then the volume 3 at the very end of the British Empire, or like the falling of the British Empire. And each volume, as is typical Folio Society order,